Welcome, everybody, to Women and Work Culture. I'm Selena Rezvani, and this is a show really all about making workplaces more inclusive and helping companies really make those bold bets on their female talent. I am so pumped to be here today with Chandni Kazi and Claire Hastwell of Great Place to Work Institute. And what we're really doing is pulling back the curtain on what makes a best workplace for women. So welcome, Chandni and Claire. We're so happy to have you today.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So glad to be here and have you. A super warm welcome as well to our community. We are so happy to have you here each week and to learn together. Drop us a note if you haven't already and tell us where you're joining from today, who's in the house. I already see Shelly from Washington State, welcome. Ekansh from India, Ibrahim from Somalia, Tampa Bay, Anissa and Michelle in the Philly suburbs. We're so happy to have you with us today. Let me give you the inside scoop before we jump in on our wonderful guests today. Chandni Kazi is a data scientist with Great Place to Work, and that's the company best known for ranking the Fortune Best Places to Work lists. Her research has been featured in places like Wall Street Journal and Fortune, and she's written papers like Women in the Workplace Study, Defining the World's Best Workplaces, and a series on innovation as well. Claire Hastwell is the content marketing manager for Great Place to Work Institute. She researched the Fortune 100 Best Workplaces for Women, and she co-authored the report, Women in the Workplace. She's a contributing writer for Fortune and the chief editor of the Great Place to Work company blog. How awesome. And on a personal note, I just want to say I had my very first consulting job almost 15 years ago at Great Place to Work Institute. And what an awesome place it was to cut my teeth as a new consultant, and so many smart, supportive colleagues who I'm still friends with today. So I feel like Claire and Chandni, we are new old friends, you know, like those new old friends you sometimes meet. So community, as we go, please send us your questions about best workplaces for women, and we will try to get to them in our power half an hour together. So I want to dive right into the list and talk to you, Claire, about a specific item I noticed on your 2020 list just out last month. There's a striking number of financial services firms. Isn't there? And it's interesting, you know, so many of us might have a picture of a very male-dominated industry, you know, a Wolf of Wall Street kind of industry. Tell us how this industry is evolving to be more inclusive and welcoming to women.
Yeah, that's right. So we found that among the top 20 best workplaces for women, there were 9 who were in the financial industry, which was a big jump from just 3 last year. And so I interviewed 3 executive women at financial firms on this list. And a big theme was that they're recognizing that diversity is a business advantage. So organizations with diverse leadership teams attract diverse talent, and they also make better decisions, create more unlikely ideas, and they're realizing that employees should represent the market that they're serving. They also are becoming more inclusive of women through the networking opportunities that they're providing. So, you know, back in the day used to be men getting together over 18 holes of golf or going to steakhouses dinner. But now these best workplaces for women in the finance industry are making network opportunities in different settings, like going to a cultural event or a fitness class. So women aren't missing out, because unfortunately women still shoulder the lion's share of childcare. So they're not missing out on these networking opportunities when they're going to have to pick up children from work, for example. Also, they said that women don't have to present as male to fit in to these workplaces anymore. So different communication styles are more welcome, and individuality is really embraced. And also some industry leaders such as Goldman Sachs, they're really taking a public stand. So Goldman Sachs recently announced that they won't take a company public unless there's at least one woman on the board. So these industry leaders are making big public statements, which is really shifting the way that the financial industry is for women.
That's awesome. I love that financial services companies are doing this with multiple levers, not just one, because I think we all know culture isn't just one of those things. It's made up of many interactions and experiences and moments. So I love that. So much inspiration there. Chandni, I want to ask you a question that comes from Anissa, and I'm going to demote myself here so that we can see you.
So generally speaking, what's been happening in companies to make them great workplaces for women? That's such a great question, and thank you for submitting it. If we look at just this year, 2020 has been awful, and we all know why. But it has been worse for women, and even worse for Black, Indigenous women of color. For example, 80% of the healthcare workers working the front lines during the pandemic are women. And how about how Black women were the most unemployed at the height of the pandemic, most affected? Workplaces can either heighten the financial, physical, or mental burdens that people are suffering through right now, or they can alleviate these stressors. And that's what leaders at the best workplaces do. They met the fearsome challenges of 2020 by doubling down on investing in their people and investing in the practice of inclusion. And they did this because work is better for women and for all employees are companies that experience better innovation, better profits, and better existence. And I do mean existence quite literally. We found that during the Great Recession, companies that weren't fully inclusive flatlined, whereas inclusive companies thrived. They had 4 times the annualized returns compared to the S&P 500.
Wow. That's impressive to see, and I'm glad to see these trends. And I think the first one you mentioned is most meaningful to me. So often in the past, we talked about women really broadly, in very broad strokes, what's good for women at work. And I'm really happy to hear you talking with a more intersectional lens, right? Because if you're Black, if you're Indigenous, if you're a person of color or LGBTQ, right, there's an added dimension. There may be a double bias, a triple bias in some cases that you're experiencing. So thank you for raising that. Really glad companies are reacting to that. I want to ask you something a little different, Chandni. One of your findings really stood out to me, and it was that male executives were 2.6 times more likely to perceive fair treatment regardless of gender compared to women executives. And so I'm really curious about this. I know you call this dynamic executive blinders. Will you talk to us about why you think this happens?
Of course. It's actually pretty related as well. It's likely because workplaces and leadership positions weren't designed for women, especially for Black, Indigenous women of color. And businesses didn't need to, since women were excluded from corporate America altogether and segregated into domestic service positions. So by definition, executive blinders existed intentionally from the get-go. And companies are removing these blinders by increasing the representation of women in key leadership positions. This is by far the fastest and easiest way to redesign workplaces to fully include women. Now, I've also seen companies that are removing these blinders by surveying all of their employees, and more importantly, doing something with the results through behavior changes and policy changes. Take Workday, for example. They survey all of their people on a regular basis. And in one survey, they found in a specific department where women engineers didn't think promotions were happening fairly compared to their male counterparts. They brought this data to an executive, and his first reaction was, "This can't be true." Now, what makes Workday such a great workplace was his second reaction. "Let me learn more." He spent the time in focus sessions talking to women engineers, specifically about promotion practices, reviewing the policies around promotions, and made changes. And by their next survey, the gap disappeared. So the moral of the story is, don't assume that you know what your people are experiencing, especially if you're an executive. It's important to survey and take what your people are telling you at face value.
Yeah, what great advice. And Michelle's following that up, asking, is it possible to remove those executive blinders? And it sounds like Workday, with their example, was able to, right? But they had to listen first, not assume, but really listen. And I think that's so important with this work, that we really have women co-create the solutions, right? We don't just suggest and put them out there for people. We also see Elizabeth chiming in saying, I'm in the automotive business sector and at the top are only males. Another user saying, love seeing more women in leadership roles. It's so empowering and inspiring. It's really true though. You can't change what you don't see. You can't change what you don't see. So if you hear bubbling perceptions in your workplace that all is not right, that women could be better included, ask how you could listen more and get more information. I want to pivot a little bit, Claire, to talk about something that comes up so often on this show, and it's imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. I know I'm no stranger to it. Lots of us have experienced it. Plenty of research shows women are more likely to feel this imposter syndrome than men. Can you share with us why you think that is?
Sure. So first of all, I'll define imposter syndrome a little bit. So it's a feeling of intellectual phoniness where you don't feel like you belong or are deserving of where you are. And yeah, the research shows that it's more prevalent in women and more prevalent in high achieving women. And the reason is that when we find ourselves in roles that would have been out of reach or unfamiliar to our parents, this is when we feel like we don't belong in that position. There was an HBR study that I was reading where they surveyed and interviewed women executives and found that many don't see themselves as future CEOs. In fact, 2/3 said they didn't realize they could be a CEO until someone else told them. And they described themselves as being very focused on driving results rather than their advancement or success. And so the reason is that women don't always see people like them in senior positions. So when you do find yourself in a senior position, you don't feel like you belong there. I think also it happens early in childhood. I remember when I was growing up, my mom would ask my brother to take out the garbage, but ask my sister and I to do ironing or more, female domestic tasks. And also talking about, oh, this is a boys' subject at school, this is a girls' subject. And so those, they make you believe that I'm not capable of doing this, or I'm only capable of doing that. So I think we can all be careful about the language we use, like not assigning a gender to things, so that when women feel like they do belong when they reach certain positions, or if they're working in a certain industry. And so what we're seeing among best workplaces that how they're helping imposter syndrome is better representation at senior leadership levels, and also allyship and mentoring from senior male leaders who are advocating on women's behalf. That is also really important too.
That's huge. And you're speaking my language about starting with, great gender messages early instead of prescriptive gender messages. I have 7-year-old twins, boy-girl twins, and it's so remarkable. It really is how things are marketed differently to them, how shirts for my son tend to say genius and leader and trailblazer, and more for my daughter say things like sweet and cupcake, and friend. Very interesting. And I'm right there with you. Liz is saying imposter syndrome is so real. Yet women can sometimes not apply for those jobs unless they meet 80% plus of the requirements, meaning they're often more qualified walking into the role than counterparts. And I think a great prompt for all of us is to maybe ask ourselves, what's something you've been holding yourself back from? Maybe you've been telling yourself, I need one more job to be ready for that. I need 4 more years of doing X before I'll throw my hat in for that. This is the sign you've been waiting for to push on that, and maybe put your name up for it. Raise your hand for it. What a great answer. I also want to share one other quick mantra. You talked about belonging. And sometimes when I'm in those high stakes situations, I've said to myself, I 400% belong here. And it can really change that mindset, even if you are the only in the room, and give you that added courage that we all need sometimes. Chandni, I want to ask you a question and dig a little more into the data, specifically something you found around feeling included at work. You showed that women feel more included the higher they rise in an organization. So while men kind of lead in feeling included at work across managerial ranks, we see that gap between men and women shrink at the top. Will you talk a little bit more about why that difference is? Why do you suspect?
Of course. At first, this felt at odds with the executive blinders findings we found using the same data set. But that wasn't until we looked at the intersection of experiences across genders, race, ethnicities, and managerial levels. And we found that feeling included at work does improve with managerial responsibilities, but at different rates. So white Caucasian women felt the largest gain in inclusion as they moved up the ranks. And that's where we saw the gap really decrease at the executive level. But for Hispanic Latinx women, they felt the smallest gain in feeling included at work with more management responsibilities. And we found that for Black and African American women, they saw a sizable gain in feeling included at work as they went up the ladder, but it wasn't nearly enough. They still felt the least included at work at every level of management compared to the other race ethnicities. And so this again just shows the importance of having that intersectional lens. And it reminds me of something that Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, the author of the New York Times bestselling book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, said at one of our Great Place to Work virtual events last month, which was, if you are advocating for women's rights, but in your mind you picture a white woman, then you're not helping all women. And it's time we start advocating for all women.
Wow, that's powerful. And to hear those numbers be so different and frankly so consistent in their trends is really striking, and I think shows us we have work to do, and we can't stop cutting the data, right? So that we see that intersectional lens. Wow, powerful. I want to bring up a question Valerine posed, which is, do you think this is something organizations should have formally, or is it counterproductive to for leaders to have to do it, and should they be able to do it more voluntarily? And so you had mentioned earlier kind of being an ally. And let's apply that question to allyship. Do you think ally training or even formal mentoring, should it be something required, heavily encouraged, or should it be totally voluntary?
That's a great question. And there's about a decade plus of research showing that certain forms of racial sensitivity trainings don't work. And that's when you host a meeting, you spend 1 hour talking about racial issues, gender issues, and what it means to be in the workplace, and then do nothing else. So anytime, I think it's very important to continue these conversations in a way that fits your culture, where everyone is in a trusting environment and you're listening as leadership to make policy changes. You're not listening just to empathize, but you're listening because you're going to take action and you're trying to figure out what that action is. And you're talking to your people, you're hosting these seminars or hosting these programs at your work because you're trying to make it a better culture more systemically. And so I think that whatever you need to do to say, we got work to do and I need to figure out what needs to change, that's kind of the mode I think would be best for your company to move forward.
Yeah, hearing from one user, once again, allyship is so critical. Thank you for calling it out. And another comment, ally is a verb. Ally is a verb, right? It's not just a crown or like a trophy you get that lasts forever. It's an active part of our everyday work, isn't it? That we need to keep earning, frankly. Michelle asks a question for either or both of you that I think is really provocative and interesting. You work with so many great companies who seem like they've figured it all out, like they've got it all together when it comes to gender inclusion. She asked, do you ever see struggling cultures become great? Or do you have to kind of be very good to become great?
That is a good question. I'll say, at least to start off, that the best companies don't have it all figured out. When we compared the best workplaces to other organizations, they still had a gender gap. The difference is that it was 1/4 the size that we see across other companies. So they don't have it all figured out, but they are showing us the way, and they are trying. And every year we see that gap shrinks more and more. And I really feel like we can learn from how they are moving through this process. And a big thing we are seeing is more representation at leadership, more representation on the board, especially more healthy conversations to, you're having conversations, you're listening to understand someone rather than listening to figure out when you can speak next. And so it's a very different mindset that you go into understanding all of these social concerns.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really encouraging message for companies or cultures that maybe are struggling or feel fractured. Maybe they just merged with another organization and, things feel anything but stable or progressive at the moment. So a great message, you don't have to have it all figured out to be great. Awesome. I want to ask you a question, Claire, because I think so many of us are living a juggling act right now of wearing lots of hats during COVID, work and home life colliding in so many ways that are new. Have you seen companies on the list do an especially good job responding in COVID times? Is there something they're doing for women in particular that's helpful?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of really great examples of how companies are helping their employees extra during the pandemic, particularly women. So I interviewed 3 women from different companies on this list: Pinnacle Finance, also Capital One, and Edward Jones. And a strong theme came through. What it came down to is they're helping keep women in the workforce, because there's been a lot of situations where one parent has had to step away from work to juggle this triple role of not just taking care of their children, but also schooling their children. And unfortunately, that is more often than not the woman's stepping back from her career. So these companies are stepping in to help manage the schooling and childcare. So one example, we have Edward Jones. They are being really flexible. It's all about flexibility for them. So they're letting women choose their hours based on when they need to be like supporting children or schooling. Also, many leaders are telling parents it's okay if your child makes a cameo on our Zoom call.
Right.
It's like is essential for psychological safety, because employees, when they know that it's okay that their child might interrupt the meeting, they're not preoccupied worrying about their kids. So they can be more focused and also feel less anxiety about their work. So yeah, empathy is another way as well. Also, some companies are giving discounts for tutoring. And one company that I've been really, really impressed with is Synchrony, who are also in the finance industry, funnily enough. They have designed a very comprehensive summer camp, because what they did is they used the Great Place to Work survey, and they surveyed their staff, and they found that it was parents that were really struggling the most. And one of their key concerns was that their children were missing out on summer camp. They weren't getting this really important learning experience or like socializing with other kids. So they brought on all these experts, and they designed a summer camp which had subjects ranging from science to the arts to diversity and inclusion,
Wow.
and wellness, really comprehensive. And they also found in their survey that it wasn't just parents with young children, but also parents with teenagers, because teenagers were missing out on career development opportunities that they would otherwise get by going, having work internships. So what they did is they got teenagers to lead these summer camp to kind of classes and be like mentors for the younger children. So it was great because the kids were learning. They were also getting like mentoring opportunities. And also when they did a follow-up survey, they found that these teenagers, what they described as like a sense of purpose, which is what they were missing from by being locked up inside and not being able to connect or learn in these ways that they normally would. So it was hugely successful. They also did a kids art exhibition, and they ended up rolling it into the school semester as well. And also another thing I liked about this program is that it was really inclusive, which is really important. We found from our research, benefits need to be inclusive. So it wasn't just people who were working normally in their head office, but also parents in their call centers could be involved with this program as well. And also they rolled it out to their offices in India and the Philippines, and they made it so that it was it applied to the local culture. So summer camp is really quite an American thing. They don't really have that in India and the Philippines. So they called it like an after-school program, and made it adjusted to their kind of school schedule as well. So yeah, really, really impressive, and yeah, they had such a great response from their employees. It brought everyone together, and yeah, so it's really great to see how these companies are supporting not just employees, but the whole, what we call like the whole self. So like the employees and their families, themselves outside of work. Huge. Really key to creating a great company culture.
I love that best practice at Synchrony and some of those benefit ideas. Valerine, one of our community, is chiming in, sharing her own. I recently started a new role, and one of the most impressive things was being on video meetings and seeing others with kids coming up to them for questions, etc. It let me know they really value work-life balance. Wow. Sometimes a picture like that is worth 1,000 words. So many wonderful examples you shared with us today that really give people permission to be human, right? And are meeting folks, especially women who are shouldering so much, meeting them where they are right now, this moment. So thank you, Chandni and Claire, for the many ways you're really helping make work better for women through your research and your wonderful recommendations and best practices. This has been so great. For you all, if you'd like more insight around best workplaces and Chandni and Claire's work, you'll see links in the show notes, both for the 2020 list, so you can look at the profiles of each of the companies, but also you want to check out the blog posts that both Chandni and Claire have written about women in finance and even around how to create an anti-racist workplace. Very powerful. I hope you'll stay in touch with me to check out my LinkedIn learning courses on being that fierce self-advocate and making your voice heard. Join my newsletter tribe, and I hope you'll also follow me here on LinkedIn if you're not already. I hope to all of you, you'll stay healthy, stay well, and lead on. Thanks, everybody.